grow for another 12 hours or so.
Thanks for joining me today. As always, this is just a demonstration of how I go about doing things. If you have a better way, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. If you decide to do one of these skills yourself, I would encourage you to research multiple sources. I've included a couple of excellent links in the description, as well as links to me doing these skills in real life. Enjoy the video, and I'll see you on the next skill. Today I want to talk about how you take a sourdough start out of the fridge and get it growing again. There's various number of reasons you might put it in the fridge. For me, I travel quite a bit, and so when I travel, we need to slow down the growth. And so if I'm going to be traveling more than a week or so, I'll put it in the fridge. When you take a sourdough start that's been in the fridge for an extended period of time, there's a specific way you want to bring it back. And so I'm going to go through that today. So we'll get our start out of the fridge. Basically what you're going to need, a jar. I like a wide mouth mason jar for my sourdough starts. It just makes everything easier. Then a scale. I like to measure everything in grams because it's easy. And some water and some flour. Anytime you're adding bacteria to something you want to grow, you want to use about a 1 to 10 ratio. So what I'm going to do is just take my start. When it sits for a while, it's actually going to settle out. So I like to stir it just a little bit, just to get everything kind of rehydrated. I like to keep about a 1/2 flour by weight, 1/2 water by weight ratio. So by stirring it, you'll get that ratio. So then what I'll do is just put my jar on the scale. Again, I use grams just because it's a nice small unit. If you use ounces, it's hard to be accurate, but with grams, it's pretty easy. So then I'm just going to take and pour part of my start in there. In this case, I'm going to go for about 20 grams. As close as I can get. There we are, 20 grams. Now, it's pretty simple. 20 grams would be 10% of 200. I'm going to fill it up to 200. So I'm actually going to fill it up to 220. You don't have to be that precise. So I'm going to tare it now. And what I'm going to do is take it up to 100 because again, we want half volume water and half volume flour. All right, so that's 101. That's close enough. With this, you don't have to be super accurate, but going in grams does allow you to do that. So now that, 101. I like to add the water first so I can stir it. That helps me get my bacteria that are in my start spread evenly throughout the liquid. That's why I always like to do the water first. One thing that's super useful is a funnel. Don't forget to tare it after you use the funnel. Now I'm just going to add 100 grams of flour. If you use grams, you don't have to use a sifter or anything like that to get accurate measurements. So anytime I'm dealing with bread, I actually like to weigh everything out. It just makes it easier to do everything the same. Okay, and that actually ended up being 101 grams of flour. I actually have some metal chopsticks that I use. These metal chopsticks are nice. If you're going with the old German beer making method, you'd actually use a wooden stick that you would only use for your start. And then you could actually use that stick to inoculate raw flour and water if somehow you lost your start. These metal chopsticks don't work that way. And I've had pretty good luck keeping my start going. But someday I may regret that I didn't have the sourdough stirring stick that kept my culture. Okay, once it's all thoroughly stirred, then we just want to go ahead and seal up the jar. Now the thing that I like to use for my start, especially when I'm trying to actively grow it, is just a heating mat. It actually likes to grow between about 80 degrees, and this heating mat will keep it about 10 degrees warmer than inside the house. It's summer right now, so this might take it up to 85. You don't want to go over about 100, so you do have to be a little careful, but this heating mat, I've never had any problems, and it does a great job of keeping everything just the right temperature. And I'm just going to plug in this heating mat and let it sit for about 12 hours. In the morning, I'll add about another 100 grams, so about 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour, and that will just keep it fed. And then in the evening, I'll do the same thing, and we'll see how bubbly it is. And that's kind of how I judge whether or not it's ready to go. All right, so our sourdough has sat for about another 12 hours. We'll pull it out of the heating coil. You can tell it's heating a little bit just because it's dried out a little bit along the edges. That won't be a problem. When you smell it, you want it to smell doughy, but not like sweet or stale. After you work with sourdough for a little bit, you'll learn what a good smell smells like, and a smell if it's kind of alcohol-y, if it's been sitting too long. You can see there's plenty of bubbles in there. It's grown a little bit. When it's really going, this much dough will fill this whole jar, but it's going pretty good considering we just started it last night. So it's going to be the same process. Tear out our scale, grab our chopstick. I'm going to add just another 50 grams of water and 50 grams of flour. If you get too much in your jar, it'll overflow. It'll make a mess. One more thing to clean up. So, processes are the same. Just stir it around to make sure that the bacteria and the yeast in the sourdough mix are thoroughly mixed in with the water. And then put on our funnel, tare it. Then we're going to put in 50 grams of flour. Okay. So that I actually ended up with 58. So what we want to do, that's a little bit out of where I like it to be, 57. So what I'll actually do, so I have 7 more grams of flour in there than I had water. So fairly easy to correct. I'll just tare it again and add 7 more grams of water. And 7. Stir it up with our chopstick and be good to go. So once this takes off, which we'll let it sit for about another 12 hours, the next step will be to actually remove some of this and start with just a little bit of the actively growing culture. As the yeast and the bacteria grow, they're making byproducts like all living things, and those are unpleasant to live around. By not removing any of the flour mixture, those byproducts are accumulating. Even though we're adding more food and water, which they do need, those byproducts will slow down the growth. And so once this is growing up well, the next thing we'll do is remove some of the extra. And then go back to mostly a little bit of starter and a lot of new flour and water. A little time has passed and we're ready for the final step of getting the sourdough start ready for full-time production. One thing, yesterday when I left off, I said I'd plug it into my heater, let it sit for 12 hours, and then use it. However, 12 hours put me right before I went to work and I wouldn't have time to mess with it. So what I actually did is I didn't plug it in. I just let it sit at counter temperature for 24, and that tends to work out pretty good. So you can kind of delay when you use it a little bit by messing with the temperature. If you need it right away, then put it in some heat. If you won't need it for a day or maybe even 2 days, then you can just leave it at counter temperature and that'll work fine. Of course, seasons makes a difference depending on the temperature of your home. So the final step is to get rid of most of the starter that we have. We want just enough bacteria and yeast left to seed the new flour and water, but none of the bacterial, none of the growth byproducts that you find in the sourdough from actively growing cultures. So you can just throw that away, and a lot of people do that. I have a hard time throwing anything away. It's just in my nature. So one of the things I like to use that for is actually cornbread. I have a cornbread recipe that works really good with sourdough, but it's more for the taste because the rising of the cornbread comes from the baking soda and the baking powder. So I'm gonna take 300 grams of this. There should be about 400 grams. I'm gonna take 300 grams of this and I'll set it aside for my cornbread that I'll be making later. Then as you get close, you just gotta take a little slower so you don't overshoot too much. All right, that's 300 grams. The other thing, pouring, trying to keep the lid clean is not the easiest thing in the world. So we'll set that aside for later use. So now, as you can see, we're pretty much down to a little bit more than what will coat the glass jar, but not a whole lot. And you can also see that there was a lot of bubbles in it, and that means that you had a lot of good growth. So now nothing's changed here. I'm just gonna tear it. So for my sourdough bread, I need about 400 grams of start. So I'm just gonna take it to 200 grams of water and then 200 grams of flour, and that'll be it. Okay, overshot a little bit, wasn't paying close enough attention. Now we're at 212 grams, so I'll just do 212 grams of flour. I do like the wide mouth jars. They keeps the mouth a little bit cleaner, but you don't have to have that. All right. Take my chopstick, stir it up. I won't be able to make my bread until tomorrow night, so I'm not gonna store it in heat. I'm just gonna store it at room temperature, and that should get it about where it needs to be. I'll probably do a video at some point on my sourdough bread. I do it a little bit different than some people, and I think it gives me better results. Does take a little longer, but yeah. And that's how I bring a start back from refrigeration.